Chapter 2. And they lived happily ever after for a while. Destiny is a mysterious thing, sometimes enfolding a miracle in a leaky basket of catastrophe. Francisco Goldman. In this chapter, I'll share the story of how I came to be a single parent and what ultimately led me to this life I would have never chosen for myself. Have you ever gotten a telephone call that changed your life? Well, one afternoon, one of my best friends rang me. She said hello, and then she told me she had just gotten her hair cut, and my husband was her hairdresser. She asked me if I knew what he was up to, and I assumed she was talking about my husband's new lifestyle. I told her I knew he had been behaving differently, but that I didn't know what to do. I admitted that I had thought he was gay and that I believed he wanted to be caught without having to tell me straight out. I had never told anyone these secret thoughts, not even my sister. It was big for me to hear myself voicing these suspicions to another human being. From that very moment, days, events all seemed to run together until the day he left. One night he came home extremely late, so I asked him to find somewhere else to stay for the night. Apparently that was the opportunity for freedom he was looking for. He gathered up his stuff and he practically did cartwheels out the door. Well, he seemed happy enough to do a few. He thought he was finally free. I've met other people with similar story, not necessarily that their spouses are gay, but she or he wanted out and didn't have the courage to just end the marriage, so they do everything they can to make the remaining wife or husband the bad guy. That is, the one who has to draw the line that ultimately ends the marriage. I remember one of my best friends who lived nearby saying she was confused when I seemed to be upset about the separation and the imminent divorce. She asked, "Laurie, isn't this what you wanted?" Well, my answer was no, and yes, the truth was I knew our marriage was on the rocks, but I was terrified to be on my own. How would I survive? Make a living and raise 3 kids? The reality was that the marriage had ended years ago, but we had limped along and we raised 3 children together. You know what I really wanted? I wanted him to love me and not be gay. I was also struggling with depression, and this sent me spiraling downward. My physician helped me get on track with antidepressants by adding an additional prescription to what I was already taking. After a few weeks, I felt worse. The doctor changed my prescription again. Antidepressants can be a blessing to a non-functioning brain, but if they are not right, the depressed person can feel even worse. I decided I had to be proactive to make sure I was doing okay, even if it meant changing medicines, which was emotionally pretty risky, physically taxing, and very time-consuming. It was tough, but I did it for my kids' sake. I felt I just wanted to go to the liquor store, buy the hardest stuff available, whatever that happened to be, and I nixed the idea because we have a long history of alcoholism in my family. I didn't want to add another problem that I would just have to deal with later. I mentioned before that since I was a little girl, I would wake up each day and make sure I had my makeup on before anyone else was up because my mom had ingrained in me how important that was to get up and look great every day, especially when you're married so your husband won't leave you. So now here I was in my 40s with a husband who had left me. What, I didn't look good enough? And now, first thing in the morning, I would walk the kids and the dog to the school bus stop in my sweats with my wild hair and no makeup. After the kids were on their way to school, I would go home and cry my eyes out. I felt so lost, confused, and I didn't know what to do despite the fact that I was a life coach. A life coach! I thought, I just can't coach myself through this one. How would I make a living? How would I survive? What am I supposed to tell our kids? This was not my life plan. It was my worst fear being played out, and I discovered I was right all along. My husband didn't love me. He just couldn't. The morning after he left, I called a friend who had told me her story about being abandoned by her husband. She had her 2 daughters and ended up homeless. She ended up having to live in a shelter, and it was not safe there with drug deals going on in the building. It was hell on earth for her. She survived, and eventually she met her new husband and has been married ever since. I remembered her story and called her. I thought if she could make it, then so can I. I was trying to make sense of it all, and she told me I would be okay, and she said, "Remember, it is what it is." Taking off the ring was so difficult. It made me feel so vulnerable and alone. When I was with my kids and I had no ring on my finger, it seemed to scream, "She's not married." I felt alone and pathetic, like a failure, a loser. I felt like everyone noticed that I no longer wore a wedding ring and that somehow that made me bad. My husband dealt me a blow that felt like it was too much to bear shortly after he left. While stopping by to pick up some things, he told me that he had several AIDS tests and that he had never loved me. He said he just married me to prove to his dad he wasn't gay. This conversation took place 13 years and 3 kids after our wedding. In those days, AIDS tests took 7 years to determine whether or not one had been infected, and I'll never forget year number 7 after he left when I finally knew that I did not have AIDS. After he told me he never loved me, I was so stunned and crushed and humiliated, I couldn't quit crying. When the kids got home, I didn't want them to see how sad I was, so I did my best to act upbeat. At one point, I couldn't keep the facade, and my youngest, who was 6 years old at the time, he caught me crying, and he brought me a bath towel to dry my tears. It had to be a bath towel, because it was a lot of tears. He's always seen the bigger picture. Those weren't just tears. That was a river of grief. Thank you, Danon. When I put my kids to bed at night, my friend Gail called. She was my kids' speech therapist. Neither of my boys could hear well when they were little, and she was their early childhood education specialist. And she'd been coming to my home for weekly visits for more than 3 years, so we had become friends. When I answered the phone, I told her I couldn't talk because I was crying. She came over right away. I relayed the conversation I'd had earlier with the kids' dad. We drank tea, and she listened. She sat with me when there were no words either of us could say. She never offered advice or a quick fix. She validated me, listened, and cried. I was hurt, and somehow I could make it through another day. This reminded me of a time when my friend Sherry called. She was so upset about something, and silly me, I thought she wanted advice. Fortunately, I had laryngitis, and I couldn't talk. So I listened and hemmed and hawed a lot. When the conversation was over, I felt horrible because I wasn't able to advise or encourage her. She called back the next day and said, "Laurie, thank you for listening last night. I felt so understood, and thank you for not trying to fix me." So I guess laryngitis can be a gift. Now I am learning to listen well. After I was separated from my husband, I kept trying to cheer myself up, and it wasn't working. I was doing everything I knew, working home-based jobs, reading my Bible every day for peace and courage, going out in public despite the questions and pitiful looks. And friends and acquaintances were sympathetic and helpful in so many amazing ways that I don't know how we would have made it without them. Casseroles showed up on our porch. Money was slipped under the door in an envelope. Cards with wonderful sentiments arrived by mail. Despite doing what seemed like all the right things and having many tangible blessings offered to me, I still couldn't get over the depression. So I felt like a failure, and I figured I should have done more, worked harder, prayed more, and acted more wisely. I felt embarrassed for being fooled and shame for this assault on my femininity. I felt like a failure, not being able to help my children more. My daughter was brokenhearted about her own losses due to the divorce. It all came out during the Island County Fair after the split. The Island County Fair is an eagerly anticipated annual event in our family. It's an especially big deal for my 12-year-old daughter, who loves horses. Dad wasn't there to coach her through 4-H club duties and horse issues. She was also dealing with abandonment, and Mom wasn't exactly in the best state of mind. I knew I couldn't hold on to our apartment much longer with my income, and I didn't know what to do. My friend Precious called daily to check in. I kept telling her I felt like I should be feeling better and moving on, but I was just sad and confused and still so embarrassed to spend much time in public. I told her it wasn't the same for my ex. Once it was all out in the open, he was on with his new life and his new boyfriend, his new home, with an amazing vista while the kids and I were stuck in an apartment behind the hair salon he worked in with a view of a big garbage dumpster. Precious said, "But of course you are sad and confused. This is music to my ears. I had permission. The outside world imposes a time frame for those who grieve. It gives them 6 months to be sad and upset, but then they need to buck up and move on. Whether it's a divorce, death, breakup, or illness, friends and relatives will be able to show sympathy about half a year, and then they let you know you should be doing better by now." But of course, those words carried me through years of interesting circumstances. When the kid's dad filed for divorce, I was the one who had to break the news. I told him this separation was going to be permanent. Dad and I are divorcing. My middle child piped up and said, "Does this mean we'll have 2 moms and 2 dads like all our friends?" Well, my response, "I'm pretty sure I'll always be your only mom." But of course, where would I be without friends? That was a pretty significant declaration. Now I was committed, but we needed other people. I don't know where the kids and I would be without our friends. Our first Christmas after the separation was fast approaching, and I was going through the motions, but I knew I needed to decorate for the holidays. Are you kidding? I'd ask myself. I didn't want to decorate, but I got a tree on sale 2 days before Christmas. I pulled the decorations out of storage, including the nativity with green magic markers across baby Jesus' face. As a baby, my youngest had discovered felt tip markers, and Joseph had a nice big black mustache, mutton chop sideburns. I ran into an acquaintance at the grocery store. She told me she had heard about my situation, and she slipped me a $50 bill. I was shocked and humbled. The next day she called and asked if her and her husband could put up Christmas lights on our house. I said thanks, but I don't have any. No worries, she said. The next day, Sue and Rick brought lights and a ladder and put up an awesome display of Christmas lights. When the kids got home from school, they were so surprised and excited. We made it through our first holiday on our own. And get this, after Christmas, Rick and Sue came back and took all the decorations down. I can't do this on my own, Lord, but of course. I had always considered myself a morning person, but mornings now became the hardest part of my day. Getting kids up, walking them to the bus stop felt as difficult as running a marathon. There were 2 other moms at my kids' bus stop. I didn't know them, but they were dressed and ready for the day. I was repeatedly embarrassed about my appearance, but I just didn't feel I had enough energy to pull it together. I entered the conversation with them anyway. We began chatting a little each day at the bus stop, and I really grew to love these mothers. They seemed so together and fun and smart, and they liked me, and they didn't judge me for looking like a wreck. One day my story spilled out, and they were so kind. We started having lunch together every few months, and they became a lifeline, a connection for me that said I was okay, still a member of the human race, in good standing. Their friendship assured me I would be okay. I could still make friends even at my worst, and there were others. I was making friends I wouldn't have even known otherwise. I'm so grateful for the pharmacist Kathy and the school principal Karen for seeing more than a sad, dowdy woman in sweats. They forgave me for having the dog that peed on one of their kids' shoes. They didn't seem to be shocked that I didn't wear makeup. They listened to my tragic tale without demanding I buck up. They saw me, warts and all, and still accepted me into their circle and made me feel I was okay. They treated me like a friend despite the fact that they had seen me at my very worst. Next, I was ready to move my ex-husband's things out. He was a collector, so there were boxes and boxes and boxes and more boxes of clothes and shoes. My college roommate and best friend Joy came over to help me with this overwhelming project. I was in a state of numbness, but Joy made it fun. Joy likes to shake things up a bit, so we might have accidentally spilled our coffee on some shoes. Oops. Or a shirt or two may have ended up with a hole or missing a sleeve or maybe some buttons. I'm just saying, accidents happen. We laughed and cried, drank a lot of coffee, and ate those chocolate malted Easter eggs that I love so much. I was getting ready to move out of the apartment into a camper. I had to get rid of everything possible and only store what was absolutely necessary. The animals went into foster care. It was such a difficult time. This time friends Sue and Pam came to help me clean. We cranked up the country music, and I'm sure we were high on the fumes caused from bleach, ammonia, and oven cleaner. We didn't have a mop, but that didn't stop us. We got very creative, and we scrubbed and laughed, and they made it fun and memorable and actually hysterical. I cherish those rare moments of gut-wrenching laughter. There's an email you may have seen. It's circulated over and over again. It speaks of friends and the amount of time each one spends in your life. Each may be your friend for a day, a year, a lifetime, but the significance of each encounter and each relationship puts the indelible marks on our lives. I don't know what I would have done without my many types of friends. They were all so different from each other, but the mosaic of their influence in my life was just what I needed. They were my lifeline. Each had something wonderful to offer me. They were all so here for me that I felt like I was taking, but not giving much back. I know. They are such great friends, and they would tell me I was dead wrong about not offering them anything in return. Still, they inspired me so much. I want to spend the rest of my life giving something back. Now I can lend a listening ear, give compassion, offer friendships. It reminds me of the great poem posted on the wall in the pediatrician's office about a house that is messy with fingerprints on the walls. The point of the poem is that relationships are more important than a clean house. I had held many of my friends at bay and at my doorstep because I was ashamed of the condition of my home. In fact, the Messy's Anonymous books, they mention that people who are very relational tend to be even messier because their priorities are on people versus household tasks. Makes sense. Well, at least it gave me a noble excuse for a messy house. Despite all the help and encouragement, the realization hit: I am single with 3 kids and 40, on my way to living in a camper. My friends found ways to keep my spirits up. No antidotes, no advice, no shoulds. They just offered a listening ear, a helping hand, support, and laughter. But most of all, my friends believed in me, even when I couldn't. If I could, I would make an honor roll of all these friends. I will never forget who they were and are in my life. God showed up in my life through people who gave without thought of return. So how many times had I missed God showing up because my gaze was looking down? My eyes were so averted because of my tragedy that I didn't recognize all the divine encounters that were taking place in and around me. So the wonderful day came when I said, enough of that already. I prayed that I would recognize the tastes of heaven that could be attributed to God. I wanted to be more ready, more available to people along the way. If I feel a nudge to talk to a stranger, I actually act on it. I ride the bus to work. There have been many occasions when I just really wanted to read my book, but I feel that nudge to talk to the person next to me. I usually am so blessed by the conversations and just plain amazed by what I see. One day I watched a girl in a seat facing me change her clothes without showing any flesh. When she was finished, I'm not kidding you, she pulled a cake out from under her coat. She frosted it just in time for her stop. No kidding, a cake. Was a quick change artist or an angel? I met another less outrageous person. There was Luke, a male model, and Elizabeth visiting from Kenya. There was pain and hardship and triumph, too. I spoke with a lady who left an abusive husband. There was an older woman who started taking dance lessons again after caring for a sick husband for years. She told me she's getting her life back through dancing. There was a woman whose grief over her mother's sudden death has kept her from celebrating holidays. But maybe next year she'll try. Maybe Thanksgiving, she told me. A single mom on her way to traffic court told me she cleans houses to support her girls. I asked her what she would do if she could do anything, and she whispered, "Be a model." But I'm too old. I asked what she loved about modeling, and she said it was fashion. She loved the clothes, so we talked about her love of clothes. I told her I was a single mom and never lost sight of my dream, and now I'm on my way to living it. I encouraged her to hold on to her dream, and when she asked what I did, I told her I was a traffic reporter on the radio. The homeless man, who I thought was asleep next to us, piped up and said, "Hey, I listen to you all the time." See, everybody isn't drawn in when encouragement is afoot. Get this, my bus friends and I started the 510 Book Club. It was on the express bus to downtown Seattle. Then there was the community college math teacher on his way to the VA hospital. We were having a nice visit until he started making me do math. Seriously, I got off the bus. I know I've missed divine moments in my selfishness, but I am so grateful for the ones I paid attention to. It's all part of the adventure. Pretty soon I began to draw soul breaths from these encounters, and because I was available to others, I am sure I became the divine encounter for others. I made it through the initial initiation into single parenthood because of good friends, a wonderful family, and amazing community, and I made it because people stood by me, validated me, and believed in me. They offered themselves listening ears and helping hands. My faith in God is very strong, but during such a difficult time, I was blessed with the hands and feet of God disguised as my dear friends, family, and community, and the surprise of some divine encounters. Just wondering, have you had a divine encounter? Write or talk to someone about your experience. Have you had a friend or friends step in to make your tough time easier? Write about it in your journal, or tell someone, or even reminisce with that friend. What did you take away from the experience? When I look back to write about the experience, I was even more grateful for friends now than I think I was at the time because I was so caught up in my own grief. What friend reflections do you have that you see even clearer in retrospect? What's your favorite friend helping out story? Have you reminded them about it and how much it meant to you lately? As a coach, encourager, and friend, often the only thing I have to give back was my memories of the tough times and how each friend saw me through. It's a gift to reflect that back to friends even years after an event. Think about or make a list of some friend memories you would like to revisit.